Hello everyone and welcome to a really spectacular game from the final round of the Chessable Sunway Sieges tournament that's currently being played, or rather that was being played. This is the final round and it's Kirill Alekseenko versus Hans Niemann. You know both of them very well. Kirill was a member of the candidates tournament, so definitely does not need any introduction. And Hans, the man who can defeat everyone, even Magnus Carlsen in classical chess, and they are battling it out for the entire tournament. Both of them have been undefeated so far. Kirill even started with 7 wins, then he got 2 draws, and now he's facing Hans here. And Hans started with some, I believe, 5 or 4 wins, and then he got some draws and a win. So basically, Hans is down by half a point. Hans needs a win with the black pieces, whereas Kirill will be satisfied with a draw to win everything. So let's check it out. It's quite the game. It's too complicated for me, too complicated, I believe, for most people, and as it would seem, too complicated for the players themselves. So let's check it out. Kirill, with the white pieces, opens with e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4. The Italian game is on the board. Knight to f6, the 2 knights opening, and now not knight to g5, but d3, the modern bishop's opening, and bishop to c5. The Giuoco Pianissimo is on the board. Now we will have some pawn moves. We have a4, d6, and now c3 and a5. We have castles by both players, and now h3 and h6. So this is all very standard stuff. Nothing new being explored here. Rook to e1 and bishop to e6, challenging the bishop on c4, knight to d2, and now bishop to a7. And here many moves were attempted by white, such as bishop to b3, rook to a3 was tried, rook to b1 was tried, bishop captures on e6 was tried. Even the move played in the game, queen to b3, has been played before, putting pressure on the bishop here, and Hans just defends it. Queen to d7, and queen captures on b7 isn't a threat because that queen will get captured. For example, if queen captures, you can first trade here, and then rook fb8 traps the queen. Or many other ways you can trap it. So after this, knight to f1, going for that e3 square to counter the strong bishop on a7, bishop captures on c4, queen captures, and now there is a game where knight to e7 was played. Here we have queen to e6, and it is now as of move 13 that we have a completely new game. So here Kirill declines the queen trade, goes queen to b7, and we have bishop back to b6, or forward to b6. Now everything is nicely defended, you don't have to worry, and knight 3 to d2. Maybe with some ideas of knight to c4 going after the bishop, but also you can retreat to b3 so your queen doesn't get trapped with knight to a7. And that's exactly what happens. Knight to a7, queen b3, and here Hans goes for the queen trade. Captures, and knight back to c6. So okay, queens have been traded off, and Kirill is looking very solid. Like I said, he only needs a draw to win the game, and it's up to Hans to try and mix it up, to try and push for more. We have knight to e3, going for those d and f5 squares, but Hans says nope, the bishop does seem to be less worth than the knight here, and gives it up. Bishop captures on e3, and now Hans strikes in the center with pawn to d5. We have f3, improving the center, and now rook 8 to d8. The idea is now to just double up on the d file, or maybe via the e file going to the d file. So bishop to f2, we have rook f to e8, and now rook 8 to d1. We have b6 now at defending the a5 pawn, so the knight on c6 can move. Rook to d2, and now rook to e6. We have rook d to e2, going for the e-file, although I don't really understand why. This just gives Hans the open d-file. I'm sure there's a very good reason, but like I said, it's a very, very complicated game. D captures on e4, d captures, and now Hans just shifts the rook over to the open d-file. Now he controls it, and Kirill will have to figure out how to take away that control from Hans. We have g3, knight to e8, and now Hans wants to move the rook, bring the knight to e6, then bring the knight to c4, and the knight on c4 will be a monster, putting constant pressure on that b2 pawn. So king g2, rook 6 to d7, and now bishop to e3. We have knight to d6, which also allows now Kirill to take some of control of the d file. Rook to d1, and now knight to c4, putting pressure on b2 and the bishop on e3. So rook captures on d7, and while Hans could trade this knight for bishop, he decides that the knight will be stronger than the bishop, as it's a fairly close game, and it's okay, it's on opposite sides of the board, so bishop could be valuable, but the bishop isn't really doing all that much on this diagonal, plus it will be stuck guarding the b2 pawn. So just rook captures on d7, bishop to c1, and now knight to d8. So okay, Hans making a little bit of progress here, but nothing too much. We have knight to d2, Kirill wants to trade as much as possible, Hans says not so quickly. Knight back to b3, and now knight to e6, and the knight and bishop are doing their job, but they're not really spectacular. This knight cannot go to c5, cannot go to d4, can't really go anywhere. You will have to shift it to a1, and then maybe decide on maybe c2 square, or maybe you're going to push the b pawn. So rook to d2, if the knight moves, Kirill is ready to go undergo some further trading, and now you cannot move the knight. The rook would be hanging here, so king f8, we have rook to d5 going after the e5 pawn, and pawn to f6 now. We have king to f1 and king to e7. King to e2, now comes g5, grabbing some space on the king side, bishop to e3, and now finally knight to c4, again putting pressure on b2 and the bishop. Here Kirill trades, rook captures on d7, and now king captures on d7. We have bishop back to c1, guarding the b2 pawn, and king to c6 now. So are the knights here better than the knight and bishop? Yes, they are, but are they better enough to actually win the game? Well, that all depends on the player wielding the two knights. So here, knight to a1 by Kirill, pawn to h5, and now comes the move that almost always wins the game for white, except in this particular position. Here, Kirill plays pawn to b4. And look at this, a captures on b4, c captures on b4, definitely makes sense. You want to create a pass pawn with a5 at some point. Knight to d4 check, now checking the king and connecting with the f3 pawn. So it seems that you have to stay back to defend the pawn, but not really, just king to d3, as the knight on c4 is undefended. Now Hans plays b5, the absolute top move. Now if a captures on b5 and doesn't really do all that much, you can just play king captures, the knight will be defended. So here, pawn to f4, and this is where the game really explodes. This is where the fun starts. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the absolute best move for Hans while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on being a true master of the endgame, as you always are. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is e captures on f4. This is the move you had to find, leaving the knight here stranded. But if the knight is captured, then Hans would win the game in an incredible fashion. Look at this. If king captures here, then f captures on g3. And it seems like you could maybe stop the pawn with bishop to e3, because now if knight captures, king captures, and you can reach the pawn. But there's h4. And now it doesn't matter what white plays, really. Completely, it's the same. There's g4, and after h captures h3, and the pawn is now unstoppable. So what you would have to find after this e captures on f4 move is g captures, and now g4, h captures on g4, and now h4. How do you stop the h pawn now? Only f5. You have to free up the f4 square for the bishop, because if you go for bishop to e3 now, then it doesn't work. Just h3, and after bishop to g1, there's knight to f3. Attacks the bishop and guards the h2 square. That's game. So you would have to find this f5 move, and then after h3, bishop to f4, guarding the h2 pawn. Then comes knight to f3, and the bishop will be lost. For example, a5, you're just going to play h2. Now, Kirill would have to part with the bishop, and we would get this position. Also, the g4 pawn is hanging. Now you have to play g5, only move for white, f captures on g5, and this would be the position that Hans would have gotten if he played that. So white does have drawing chances. He does have the passed e pawn, the passed f pawn, the passed a pawn, but he would have to play an engine perfect game. in order to do so, and even then we cannot say for certain. But Hans almost immediately played G captures on f4, and this allows Kirill just to capture. G captures on f4. Now there is no point in capturing, you would just lose a knight. Knight to f3, and now knight to c2. We have knight to g1 going after the h3 pawn. Now comes knight to e3, offering a trade of knights, and now knight to b6. Here, interestingly, if you go after the h3 pawn, there's a captures on b5 with check, and now the knight is just hanging. It's still okay, still better for black. Even after captures and captures, you will capture this pawn, and black is just up so many pawns. Even if captures here, now the two passed pawns here, also this pawn hanging, it would be white who would struggle here to get a draw, but not too much, it would be a draw. So after knight to e3, we have knight to b6, and now comes f captures on e5. We have f captures on e5, and now pawn to a5, attacking the knight. Here Hans played knight to a4, and he was in this position on move 50 that Kirill and Hans agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done. There are some things to be done here, but it is only Kirill who can win this, and it is not... he doesn't have to push for anything, he just needs a draw to win the tournament, and that's why they agreed to a draw. But just to give you an example of what could happen and how crazy the position is, look at this. Okay, this pawn is hanging, so let's say h4. And now, how do you continue this with Hans's pieces? Let's say you go knight to f3, you want to win this pawn, you're already lost, and you can't even imagine why. Knight to f5, and this knight is now trapped. It's that simple. Absolutely incredible. For example, knight e1 check, you're just going to play king to d2. You're going to push the knight back. If knight to g2 or knight f3 check, doesn't really matter. You're going to play king to e2. And now, let's say king b7, you're going to play king f2, and you can even play knight to f4, but now comes the bishop captures on f4, e captures, and e5, and there is no defense against the passed e pawn and the passed a pawn. For example, king c8, you're going to play e6, king to d8, now you're going to play a6, and after knight b6, a7, and now doesn't really matter, king to e8, because all of these squares are covered, e7, and the knight cannot move, the king cannot move, the king can easily gobble up all of the pawns, then push the h pawn to victory. Absolutely everything is winning here. So if the game had continued, it would be very hard for Hans not to lose this, but Kirill would not be in any danger. What you would have to find is king to b7, then you would have to see after knight to f5 that you can play knight to h3, and after knight to g7 going after the pawn, now c5. That's the way to play this. Absolutely stunning. Knight captures on h5, c captures on b4, now king c2, and now the only move that doesn't lose for Hans, b3 with check. This is how you prevent king to b3. King captures on b3, now comes knight to c5 check, and even after king to b4 you can play knight to d3 check, connect with the bishop, and still king captures on b5, knight captures on c1, knight to f6. You will now have to worry about this pawn, and it doesn't matter that black is up a knight, white is still better here, but in the end it will be a draw. So absolutely incredible game. Hans had a great opportunity here to play for the win if he spotted after f4 this g captures on f4 idea, but it's incredible that he played e captures on f4. The problem is, I think that Kirill was the one who was very low on time, and Hans didn't want to allow him to play on his time. That's why maybe he rushed it a little bit. But yeah, both of them finished the tournament undefeated, but it is Kirill Alekseenko who takes the win with 7 wins and 3 draws. So absolutely incredible stuff. Kirill wins the tournament, he wins the Chessable Sunway Sieges 2022, and Hans will emerge as a 2700 once the rating list in January is released. He will be some 2705, I believe. So also a good tournament for him. But yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and big congratulations once again to everyone who was able to solve this. This was a beautiful end game, and hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Konstantinos Lamperdis, Jeffrey Clayman, Miloš Knežević, Daniel Stone, and David Groskin for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.